Not even sure reptiles have dicks.
We are talking Terror Train 2022. And yes, this is a remake of an early 80s horror movie of the same name. And this one is directed by Philippe Gagnon and is essentially a mystery whodunit slasher movie. So the plot is as follows. At the beginning of the film, we see a kind of prank of a kind of, I forget what you call them in America, like these student house type things, a fraternity prank, and ends up having some tragic results. Cut to a few years later, and this same kind of group of college friends are going on a Halloween party on this train. Everyone's in kind of fancy dress. However, there is a killer among them, and this killer is killing victims, taking their kind of fancy dress costume, wearing it, killing someone else, putting on a new costume, etc, etc. So their kind of appearance is constantly kind of changing. And of course, this being a Halloween party, people are never really sure of what they're seeing is the real thing, or if it's actually just a kind of a prop or a gag or prank, you know, done by these kind of fraternity kids. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, as I've mentioned, this is actually a remake of, I believe it was a 1981 movie. I don't think I've seen the original movie. If I have, it was a long time ago and I don't really remember it. So I can't tell you exactly how it compares to the original, albeit I have read that it is a relatively kind of faithful kind of remake ultimately, kind of obviously updated for kind of modern audiences. But outside of that, it's kind of somewhat of a beat-for-beat remake. So let's talk about what I think works in this movie. Like I said, this is somewhat of a mixing of a genre. Obviously, it's not particularly original because it is a remake, but you are having this kind of mix of whodunit, a murder mystery, coupled with a slasher. Now, murder mysteries have had something of a comeback recently with the likes of movies like Glass Onion, White Lotus, you know, the kind of the Poirot movies, things like that. So there is that kind of somewhat of a resurgence for this kind of this genre, and slasher movies have always kind of been there. So you know, you can see the attraction of kind of making a movie like this. Now, this movie is a Tubi movie. It was made for the free online streaming service, and their movies have typically been somewhat cheap. But I gotta say, for many aspects, I actually thought this movie was relatively kind of well polished. I have to say, it looks well put together. Yes, there are some elements in that where the budget does come through, particularly in things like gore, but nonetheless, I still think the actual technical side of stuff, the filming, the photography, the framing, the sound design, was actually of a pretty good standard. I thought was proficiently made, as is kind of like the pacing of the movie, editing and general kind of direction, I all thought was pretty good. I have to say, I thought the acting was perfectly fine. Okay, this isn't Oscar-worthy acting by any stretch of the imagination, but I've got to say, I think the characters did a good job here of kind of selling you on their kind of characters and kind of giving a reasonable performance, albeit the characters are a little bit broad, but we'll come on to that. There is a little bit of modern kind of social kind of, you know, politics that have got injected in. Nothing too much, but there's kind of talk of cancel culture and things like this. So there are some elements here that wouldn't really have been in the kind of the original, to try and to kind of update it, and obviously to do with like technology and things, and just general kind of the divisions that kind of exist in the kind of the modern world. It doesn't overdo it, but I think it has a couple of lines here and there that kind of makes kind of comment on that. You know, for example, the hazing, the kind of this right of essentially pranking kind of newcomers to the kind of the fraternity, etc., is now kind of frowned upon. And again, there's a little bit of kind of commentary on that, things kind of gone wrong, etc, etc. So there are some kind of updated kind of ideas here, and it does end up having that kind of like modern kind of lick of paint. I think the idea here between this kind of this killer essentially changing their appearance is quite a fun one, and there are some kind of quite fun kind of kills in full costume where we see a full costume killer killing a full costume victim and things like that. So that was all pretty good. I think generally speaking, slasher fans will probably quite enjoy this one. I don't think it's particularly memorable, but I think it's perfectly serviceable kind of like low budget kind of slasher film. You know, it's not nothing particularly original. It has elements of a little bit of a whodunit, who's the killer, and things like that. The acting is serviceable, and there's an interesting kind of looking killer. So what doesn't work? I mean, it's the characters here, as I've mentioned, are somewhat kind of broad. We have the good girl who, you know, you can do no wrong. It's ultimately our kind of main kind of protagonist. We have the typical kind of arsehole guy, things like this, the slutty girl. Yes, they're all there. All these type of kind of like character types and broad stereotypes are kind of there in this movie. You know, sometimes it would be nice to deviate from this formula, I have to say, a little bit, but this one does not do that. As I've mentioned, I think this movie could have been a little bit more on the kind of the gruesome side. The kills are... There's one kind of like beheading, for example, but it's coupled with kind of CGI blood, not particularly gratuitous. Now, this being made for a free streaming service, I suspect that there's limitations about what they can do in true gory fashion, but it does seem a little bit toothless, to be honest with you. So this is probably, you know, somewhat of a teen kind of aimed kind of movie, to be honest with you. So those of you who want more visceral kind of violence and more kind of explicit kills, I think may be kind of disappointed with this. I think with these, one of the issues I have with kind of murder mystery films in general is that you know the killer is someone that has been introduced in the cast, and you know that they're going to try and give you some red herrings. So it's not all that difficult to kind of, you know, I think this person is going to be the killer here. And I thought this early on, and I was kind of right. If I'm, you know, well, I was right about who the kind of killer was. So you know, it's. I think they sometimes cripple themselves in regards to having this kind of mystery killer when they were obviously introducing a bunch of kind of characters. Think, okay, well, it's clearly going to be one of these characters that had a few speaking lines and things like this. I've got to be honest with you, I thought the movie dragged just a little bit in the kind of the middle. I didn't really feel it was kind of having anything new, really. It did feel like, although it was serviceable, and I think, you know, the plot certainly wasn't slow. To me, it didn't really have much kind of like oomph or originality to really kind of like elevate this. So it's again serviceable. The pacing was serviceable, but just not. I don't think particularly kind of supercharged in any particular kind of way. Overall, you know, this is I think a good example of a serviceable, made for kind of streaming service, low budget slasher film. I don't think it's particularly bad in any real major way, but at the same time, it doesn't elevate it in any real major way. It's just a kind of a very, very middle of the road kind of slasher that I think would appeal to low budget kind of slasher films, but it isn't going to be as visceral or hardcore to kind of get those kind of extreme horror fans, and I think isn't particularly original enough to maybe become anything other than kind of just somewhat kind of generic and lackluster. But it isn't a bad watch. It's serviceable. It's a somewhat kind of like enjoyable movie. It's just not going to kind of like blow your socks off at any particular time. So I'm going to go with a 5 out of 10. It's a somewhat average movie, as you can probably tell here, but it's not a bad watch. I think if you're a slasher fan, you'll probably like it, but it'll probably be a one-time watch. So perfect for Tubi. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.